Good evening. We'd like to welcome you to The Scroll. I'm your host, Eliezer Sedefine, and we're here tonight for another edition of the Scroll Fire podcast. Tonight, this will be an NTM podcast. We will have our special guest again, Sean Sebastian and Megan Scott. They're going to talk to us tonight about the subject that you came from the mind of God and the book You Came from the Mind of God. So without further ado, here's Megan Scott and Sean Sebastian.
Welcome to the deep dive. We are so glad to have you here with us today.
Absolutely.
You, the learner, the one who is always looking to expand your perspective. You're in for a truly fascinating exploration today.
Yeah, this one is it's pretty heavy, but in the best way.
Totally. Today we're immersing ourselves in a highly complex, deeply philosophical text by Eleazar. It's titled You Came from the Mind of God.
And it is a profound read.
Right. Now, our mission for this deep dive is to explore a central concept that the author calls the scroll.
The scroll, yeah.
In this framework, the scroll is the idea that every single individual is a pretemporal divine blueprint, like a blueprint written entirely before the foundation of the world.
Which is a massive concept to wrap your head around right out of the gate.
It really is.
Yeah.
And before we get going, I want to make a quick note. Whenever we explore texts with strong spiritual or, theological themes, we aren't here to take a side.
Right, no endorsements here.
Exactly. We're not pushing a specific religious dogma. We are simply here to impartially report on the content, to unpack the author's intricate ideas, and basically share the architecture of the source material with you so you can examine it for yourself.
So you can weigh it against your own worldview.
Exactly. So, okay, let's unpack this, because what Eleazar is proposing fundamentally challenges you to rethink your entire origin story.
He's really demanding a massive philosophical and existential shift from the reader.
He argues that you shouldn't look at your history, your past trauma, or your worldly achievements to define who you are. Instead, he introduces something he calls the legal geometry of identity.
And what's fascinating here is the shift in the questions we ask. I mean, we spend almost all of our modern lives asking these forward-looking questions, right?
Like, what must I do?
Exactly, what must I do or what am I going to become? But Eleazar argues that the far more important question is actually retrospective. It's from where did I come?
Right.
He asserts that until you answer that question of origin, every action you take is just a form of wandering.
Just aimless wandering.
Yeah. So throughout this deep dive, we're going to guide you through some incredibly dense concepts, specifically what he calls scroll amnesia.
Oh, that part is so good.
And the counter movement, which he terms prophetic recovery. The text really sets a reverent, almost contemplative tone right from the opening pages. It treats human existence not as some biological accident, but as a very deliberate architectural project.
So let's start right at the foundation of that architecture, the blueprint before time.
Let's do it.
The text introduces this concept of the scroll, and he is very quick to point out that this is not a poetic metaphor.
No, not at all.
We aren't talking about a piece of parchment rolled up in the clouds. The scroll, in his definition, is the eternal architecture of who you are. He writes that you were thought before you were ever formed.
You were thought. Yeah, the core thesis here moves completely beyond biology. Human existence, according to this perspective, is not just a sequence of evolutionary events.
Right.
Nor is it some divine improvisation where God is just making things up as he goes along. You are, as the text phrases it, the memory of God clothed in flesh.
The memory of God clothed in flesh. That is such a striking phrase.
It really is. The idea is that you are a manifestation of a divine idea that was documented in eternity before time even began.
Wow.
The author points out that in this theological framework, the mind of God is an active realm of origination. What God remembers, he sustains.
And that leads us to this phrase that really caught my eye, the legal geometry of identity.
Yes.
I want to spend some time here because it takes a very abstract spiritual concept and makes it structurally rigid.
It gives it boundaries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In Eleazar's view, your scroll isn't just a general career path. It's not a bulleted list of tasks you have to check off before you die. It is constructed with highly specific intersecting dimensions.
And he lists them out very clearly.
He does. He lists them as spirit, soul, body, name, seat, mantle, and terrain. But we need to define these because he's using them in very specific ways.
It's a crucial breakdown. I mean, we intuitively understand spirit, soul, and body, right? the spiritual connection, the mind and emotions, and the physical vehicle.
Circle the basics.
But then he gets into the administrative dimensions. Name isn't what's on your birth certificate, it's your true identifier, your core nature.
Your essence.
Right. And let's pause on seat and mantle, because those are unusual terms for modern readers. In this context, a seat refers to your specific position of authority or perspective.
Like where you were meant to sit and govern from.
Exactly. And a mantle is the unique capability, the weight of responsibility, or the specific gifting you carry to execute your design.
Okay, and then terrain.
Terrain doesn't necessarily mean a physical piece of land. It refers to the specific sphere of influence you were built for, say the education sector, the arts, or a specific local community. You are built to operate across these very specific domains.
So if we bring this down to the ground for the listener, this means your specific timing in history, the specific people you feel inexplicably drawn to, the environments you naturally find yourself in. The author argues these are not coincidences.
Not at all.
They are encoded right there in the geometry of your scroll. But what happens if you just ignore all of that? What if you just want to pursue a totally different path?
That's where Eleazar introduces the concept of dimensional fragmentation.
Dimensional fragmentation. That sounds painful.
It is, spiritually speaking. He warns that when you operate outside of this multidimensional blueprint, maybe because of blind ambition or because you're imitating someone else's path to success, you actually start to fracture.
Because you aren't built for that weight.
Right. You can't put a massive skyscraper on a foundation meant for a single family home without causing structural failure. When you step outside your geometry, you start leaking presence. You lose your clarity.
And you experience that deep, unexplainable spiritual fatigue.
Exactly. You might be highly successful by the world's standards, but internally, you're exhausted because you are operating outside your legal jurisdiction.
That deep fatigue is such a relatable symptom for so many people. And it brings us to a major paradigm shift in the source material. The difference between the pre-trauma scroll and the post-trauma survivor.
This is a massive distinction.
It really is. Eleazar attacks what he calls the myth of temporal origin. This is the assumption that your life began the day you were born.
Right.
He argues that believing you began in time tethers your entire identity to temporal battles, cultural limitations, and crucially, generational wounds.
Because if you assume your story started in the delivery room, then everything that happens to you on the timeline feels defining.
Yes.
This introduces a vital distinction. If your scroll predates time, if you existed as a thought before the world was framed, then your identity is inherently older than your wounds.
Older than the wound.
Your trauma did not create you, and in his framework, it certainly does not define your ultimate architecture.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
If Eleazar is arguing that our identity is completely written before time, how does he address our actual lived experiences? Doesn't this border on ignoring the reality of what people go through?
It's a very fair question.
Because our pain, our environments, our traumas, they objectively shape our personalities and our behaviors.
That is exactly the friction this concept creates. But Eleazar doesn't deny the reality or the deep pain of human trauma. What he proposes is a distinction between the soul's adaptation to dysfunction and the original eternal record.
The soul's adaptation.
Right. He suggests that while your soul might adapt to survive a toxic environment, that adaptation is not your true identity. The danger, he argues, is when you confuse the womb and the timeline that follows with your true beginning.
Wow.
When you do that, you end up spending your life trying to heal what heaven has already resolved. God doesn't rewrite the eternal record just because you got hurt in time. Your original design remains completely intact beneath the layers of trauma.
So what does this all mean for the healing process then? It's essentially a massive reframing.
A total reframe.
Eleazar wants the reader to realize they aren't the sum of their temporal experiences.
Yeah.
In his framework, you are the engraving of a divine thought. Think about how many people build their entire identity around a false beginning.
So many people.
They build their personality around pain they endured, a rejection they suffered, or even heavy expectations placed on them by their family. It's almost like starting a marathon halfway through the course from a position of injury.
That's a great way to put it.
He is inviting the reader to reclaim their original eternal starting line.
He is incredibly clear on this point. You are not meant to just be a survivor of the timeline. You are meant to be a continuation of divine memory.
A continuation of divine memory.
But of course, this naturally leads to the next major hurdle in the text. If we possess this pristine eternal architecture, Why is it so hard to access? Why don't we just naturally live out of this scroll?
Which brings us to scroll amnesia and the war against divine thought. How do we forget such a profound origin? It's almost like walking into a room and forgetting why you went in there, but on a cosmic scale.
Exactly.
You spent 40 years climbing the corporate ladder only to realize you're in the completely wrong building.
That is a perfect analogy. And the author explains that this amnesia isn't accidental, it is engineered.
Engineered amnesia.
It is the slow, methodical erosion of divine memory. He details the mechanisms of this forgetting. It happens through trauma, which writes a narrative of pain and limitation over your identity.
Right.
It happens through repetition, which normalizes environments and behaviors that aren't originally yours. It happens through cultural grooming, where society rewards you for fitting into a predefined box.
And he even points a finger at institutional religion, doesn't he?
He does. He argues that it can sometimes replace personal revelation with rigid dogma. Over time, these forces replace your eternal scroll with socially acceptable roles. Elias calls this state mimicry disguised as memory.
Mimicry, disguised as memory. That phrase really hits hard.
It really does.
You start living a life that contradicts your blueprint, but because it's praised by society, you might even call it obedience or success or being a good citizen. The text highlights how entire systems, whether they are political, educational, or religious, actually thrive on your amnesia.
They depend on it.
They need you to forget your scroll so you could be a compliant piece of their machinery.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the author introduces the idea that the forces of darkness are essentially territorial ideologues.
Territorial ideologue.
In this theology, spiritual warfare isn't just about tempting you to do bad things. It's a war for your perception and your memory. These forces want to control your thought life.
They want you to stay asleep.
They want you to believe that your scroll must match your trauma, or that your specific talents are the only proof of your life's assignment. They want to hand you a counterfeit calling so that you remain busy and exhausted.
And most importantly, so that you never take up the actual jurisdiction you were designed to govern.
Percent.
And the symptoms of this scroll amnesia are so distinctly laid out in the text. You might find yourself constantly seeking external validation because you have no internal compass of origin.
Which is exhausting.
Completely. You might feel deep, bone-weary fatigue after performing assignments that are entirely soul-based, driven by your own mind, will, and emotions, rather than scroll-based.
Yes.
Or you might constantly feel strangely out of sync in every room you walk into, even rooms you were supposedly meant to lead. The text reminds the reader that performing for a system, no matter how much applause it gets you, is a tragic trade-off for the throne you were actually meant to govern.
This raises an important question then. If we are suffering from this engineered amnesia and our culture is constantly reinforcing it, how do we get our memory back?
This is the turning point.
And Eleazar's answer to this is perhaps the most countercultural, counterintuitive point in the entire book. Prophetic recovery, the act of getting your scroll back, is absolutely not about activation.
Yes. When you hear terms like prophetic recovery, you expect a 12-step plan or a call to strive harder, build a bigger platform, or do more.
Do more, be more.
But the answer he provides is a return to stillness. You don't recover your scroll by finding a new calling or rebranding yourself. You recover it by getting quiet enough to hear the architecture that was never erased.
It's still there.
The author says it's about ceasing all attempts at self-definition, just stopping the endless hustle of trying to figure out who you are, and instead sitting in the thought that originally created you.
It's a profound shift from outward action to inward agreement. You are not finding your voice, you are remembering your birthright.
Remembering your birthright.
But the author's also very realistic about the immense friction this causes. Stillness sounds peaceful, but in a society that demands constant production, stillness is actually highly disruptive.
Oh, absolutely.
Trying to find that stillness is like trying to hear a whisper in a crowded, screaming stadium. And when you start performing and start remembering, you become a massive threat to the status quo.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Eleazar calls this the violence of obedience.
The violence of obedience.
Now that sounds intense. Why violence?
Because it tears down the false structures you've built. When you start to remember your scroll and you step into that stillness, the systems you use to serve, the people who relied on your people pleasing, the institutions that relied on your burnout, they will not celebrate your newfound peace.
No, they won't.
They will label you rebellious, isolated, or dangerous. Systems simply cannot survive in the presence of someone who actually remembers their origin.
It's a complete disruption of the power dynamic. The text points out that prophetic recovery is going to cost you.
A heavy cost.
It will cost you false alliances.
Yeah.
It will cost you platforms that were built purely on the ego. But the return on that investment is that you reclaim your true name. You break the false agreements that kept you tethered to a mimic realm, and you align back with divine intention.
Which leads us to the ultimate purpose of this entire journey. You weren't just remembered by God so you could quietly survive the timeline and then escape it. According to the text, you were remembered to govern it. Let's look at the concept of origin-based authority.
This is where the concept of the scroll shifts from personal, internal identity to tangible external impact. The author introduces what he calls origin law.
Origin law.
This is the principle that your true authority does not flow from your temporal achievements, your degrees, your job titles, or your bank account. It flows entirely from your eternal origin.
Entirely.
And this type of governance looks very different from the way the world leads. It doesn't look like loud, striving, anxious control. It looks like what the text calls seated presence.
Seated presence is a fascinating concept. Think about the difference between a frantic middle manager who is constantly yelling to maintain control and a true leader who simply sits at the head of the table.
They don't have to yell.
Exactly. Their very presence dictates the temperature of the room. Eleazar is saying that when you are aligned with your origin, you don't have to strive for authority. It is an atmosphere shift that happens without you even giving a verbal command.
You walk into a room and the chaos regulates.
Not because you are exerting physical dominance, but because of the weight of your remembrance.
And this brings in one of the most stunning poetic dimensions of the book. The idea that creation itself recognizes your governance.
I love this part.
Eleazar asserts that the earth, time, and the elements all hold memory. They don't remember your mistakes, they remember your scroll. He argues that creation is practically pregnant with expectation, waiting for you to remember who you are. The text calls this eternal echoes.
It's a breathtaking ecological and cosmic perspective on identity. When you finally align with your scroll, the text argues that dormant things around you begin to awaken.
Things just start moving.
Generational cycles break without you having to wage some massive, exhausting, lifelong effort. Time itself unlocks and either compresses or expands to serve your assignment. You aren't trying to force the memory into your current assignment, you're simply aligning with what creation already knows about you.
Have you ever walked into a room or stepped into a new territory or met a specific group of people and felt instantly recognized without any logical explanation?
Like you just belong there.
You just felt like the space knew you and you knew the space.
Yeah,
The author says that is creation literally responding to your scroll.
right.
The land knows your weight. Time bends toward divine memory.
It's a powerful framework. But we really want to emphasize that in the context of the book, this knowledge isn't just a lofty philosophical exercise meant to make you feel special.
Right, it's very practical.
It is presented as a practical, judicial realignment for your life. Living from your scroll means your daily decisions stop flowing from a place of panic, survival, or urgency.
They start flowing from a place of deep alignment.
Exactly. It means your presence begins to govern your environment naturally without the exhausting need to constantly prove your worth to anyone.
Let's synthesize this incredible paradigm shift we've just taken through the deep dive today.
Let's do it.
According to Eleazar's text, you are a pretemporal divine thought. Your true identity is older, deeper, and truer than your trauma. By rejecting the engineered amnesia imposed by worldly systems, and by intentionally returning to a state of stillness, you can reclaim the seated governance you were always designed for.
It's a framework that challenges you to stop looking at your timeline to figure out who you are and instead look back before the timeline even started.
So as we wrap up, we want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over on your own.
Something to really chew on.
A specific concept from the text glossary called scroll lag. Eleazar defines this as the delay between when a truth is spoken or revealed in eternity and when a person is actually ready to embody it in time.
Lag.
Consider the terrain of your life right now. Is there a specific territory, a relationship, or a season that feels heavily pregnant with expectation? A place that is quietly enduring scroll lag while it waits for you to finally stop performing, embrace stillness, and simply agree with the memory creation already holds of you. Thank you for joining us today as we explored the mind of God. We encourage you to return, remember, and reign.
Wow, that was an extremely powerful episode. You came from the mind of God. Once again, we'd like to thank Sean Sebastian and Megan Scott uh, for leading this conversation tonight. It's a very powerful conversation. I encourage you to go back through this tonight and listen to it. It's not something you're going to just grasp, overnight. You have to break it down in pieces. And that's what we're going to have to do. And I encourage you to go back and listen to all of the NTM podcasts and let them um, learn something from them. There's something to be learned from what Sean Sebastian and Megan Scott present. And there's also something to be learned from when you read the book You Came from the Mind of God from Eleazar Seraphim. Now, you can find these books on Kindle and Kindle Unlimited under Eleazar Seraphim, Eleazar Seraphim. You also can find this podcast and other podcasts on Spotify at Scrollfire Podcast and on YouTube at Scrollfire Publishing. Once again, I'm just excited tonight that you all decided to join us, and we're going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you very much.